Hi there, welcome to a series of videos called English for Emerson. In today's video, we're going to be talking about colonial America, specifically the French Indian War. This is a war that occurred not only in America, but also in Europe during the 1750s and 1760s. In our last video, we talked about how early America in the 1600s was defined in a lot of ways by the tobacco trade. This started slavery, and this was the first big business in America. And another business that got started up was the fur trade. You know, America had this animal called the beaver living in the streams and rivers of America. And this particular animal had a pelt and a kind of fur that was really, really valuable for making hats. To this day, a lot of hats, cowboy hats and stuff, are made out of beaver fur. Well, naturally, people who wanted to make some money and have some adventure would come out to America and go out and go trapping. They would trap the beaver and then take the skins, and then the skins would be shipped back to Europe for money. This was a big trade at the time. And this trade was kind of dominated by the French. I'm going to put up a map on the screen. By 1750, the French had territorial claims over the South, down in the area what is known as Louisiana today, the area along the Mississippi River where it enters the Gulf of Mexico. And they also had control over what is now Western Canada, up in the area of Quebec and Ontario. The British controlled the east coast of North America, and the French had the north and the south. The Spanish had more control over what is now Florida and Texas and down into Mexico. So these different European powers had control over different areas. And this went along fine for a while. I mean, there was plenty of land to go around and plenty of resources. But over time, it became more of an issue. There was a lot more conflict over time between the colonists and the Native Americans. And the French wanted to have control all the way from Louisiana, all the way up the Midwest, to connect with their territories up in Canada, in Quebec. And there began to have some disagreements between the British and the French in that area. Well, this led to a thing called the French Indian War. The French teamed up with different tribes of Native Americans and basically were ready to go to battle with the British, who were in control of the colonies that lined up against the Atlantic Ocean there, all along the East Coast. It's very interesting that George Washington, he was young at the time, he got into a battle and basically started this war with the French in what is an area known as the Ohio River Valley. This is essentially the Midwest of America. It's the area west of the Appalachian Mountains. Well, you know, it's very, very interesting. George Washington was young at the time, and he lost his first few battles. Yeah, he was, in the beginning, he was not, terribly effective as a commander. He made some mistakes early on. He got shot. At least he obviously not terribly wounded, but he had his coat have bullets ripped through it. He had 2 horses shot out from under him in these battles. So he was lucky to survive. And he learned a lot of lessons from these fights with the French and the Indians at this time. During the course of this war between the British on one side and the French and the Indians on the other, they were battling over this area of the Ohio River Valley. The British were losing early on and losing badly. They had different types of tactics in battle. It was the nature of British warfare to kind of line up. I'll put pictures of it. All the soldiers would kind of line up with their guns and just march forward. Well, the Indians, there weren't that many French people in that area, just a few trappers, but they teamed up and made alliances with the Indians. And the Indians obviously were not just going to march head first into battle. They were more sneaky. They were more skilled. They were more tactically superior. They would make, raids upon the British soldiers at night. And they would, get on they would circle around and sneak around and basically pick off the British soldiers. Do you follow me when I say pick off? They kind of picked away at the British army. They didn't just fight them head to head in a battle. Well, this tactic kind of ran down the British military, and the British were losing this war. Well, along that time in England came a new guy to power who was in charge of the war. His name was William Pitt. And he took a look at this situation. He just said, you know what? I'm not going to put up with this. We are not going to lose this war. We're going to win at any cost. And here's what we're going to do. He said, I'm going to do two things to defeat the French. Number one, I'm going to pay what is now the country known as Germany. At that time, it was called Prussia. I'll put that word up on the screen. Germany didn't really exist at that time. There were several different kingdoms in that area. But anyway, the biggest kingdom in that area was known as Prussia. And he said, I'm going to pay these Germanic tribes to go to war with France, to basically just to wear down the French military. That's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm paying big bucks for the Germans to go to war with France. Do you follow me? This is called a proxy war. You pay somebody else to go to battle with your enemy. Do you follow me? This is very important part of history and warfare. The other thing he did was he said, I'm going to blockade. This is the second thing. I'm going to blockade the French. I told you in earlier lessons that the British had a vastly superior navy to any other navy on the face of the earth. Well, he said, I'm going to blockade both the Mississippi River and the St. Lawrence River. The St. Lawrence River is the river that comes in to North America from the north, and the Mississippi River is the river that comes into America from the south. He, with his vastly superior navy, he blockaded these rivers so that the French could not get supplies in or out. He basically said, I'm going to starve them out. And we've talked in earlier lessons how a blockade is one of the most effective tactics in battle. With these two tactics, William Pitt basically ran down the French military. And it got to the point in the early 1760s that the French surrendered. It's a very, very interesting part of American history. Number one, in these early battles with the French, George Washington got a lot of experience leading soldiers in battle because he made a lot of mistakes. He was injured. He got horses shot out from under him. He lost major battles, but the soldiers gained a lot of respect for him because he was able to remain calm under pressure, and he was able to get out of these bad situations and keep everybody organized and disciplined and following his leadership. And he also learned how to deal with the attacks of the opposing enemy. He learned battlefield tactics. He learned discipline. He learned leadership. And he was greatly respected by his men, even though he lost some of these battles. He proved to be a very, very good leader, and he learned from his mistakes. So that's one thing. George Washington got a lot of experience and became a very powerful leader after even though he was defeated in some of these battles. The second thing is that England, because they paid Prussia to fight France, to wear down the French army, they incurred, which means you take on, I'll put that word up on the screen. They incurred a tremendous amount of debt. What does that mean? Well, I've told you before that England was the center of global banking at that time. Well, they borrowed money to fight this war. they borrowed money to pay Prussia to fight the war. And they were in a tremendous amount of debt after winning this war. Well, what significance does that have? Well, these two things kind of had significance together. You had George Washington became kind of a major leader of America, and he was very, very experienced after this war. And also, Britain had a tremendous amount of debt. And to pay off this debt, they began to tax the colonies heavily. We've talked on this channel how taxes create all kinds of problems. And these high taxes that were placed on the American colonies began to irritate the colonists and also people like George Washington, one of the leaders of the colonists. And this led finally to the American Revolution in 1776. So the long part of the story and the short is that Britain won the French Indian War, but they got so deeply in debt that they began to have problems with their own colonies in North America. And we'll talk more about that next time on English for Emerson. Bye-bye.